My life unraveled in a way I never could have foreseen on an otherwise ordinary evening, when the air between my wife, Julia, and me grew thick with tension. We'd been arguing for weeks, small, simmering disagreements that had festered into something uglier. But this time, it erupted into something seismic. In the heat of our confrontation, her voice sharp and unyielding, Julia threw down a declaration that hit me like a punch to the gut. "If you don't fall in line," she said, her eyes cold and defiant, "I'll divorce you. I'll take everything, your money, your kids, your entire life. You'll be left with nothing." The arrogance in her tone, the certainty she wielded like a weapon, left me reeling. I stood there, stunned, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, a chaotic swirl of heartbreak, fear, and betrayal washing over me. For a moment, I felt like the ground beneath me had vanished, and I was falling into an abyss. But as the initial shock faded, something else took root, a quiet, burning resolve. I wasn't going to let despair swallow me whole. I wasn't going to let her threats define my future. Instead, I decided to take control, to fight back in a way she'd never see coming. That night, after she stormed off to bed and the house fell silent, I sat in the dim glow of the living room, staring at the walls of the life we built together, and made a choice. This wouldn't be the end of me. It would be the beginning of something new. The next morning, I started planning. I knew I couldn't face this alone, so I sought out a family law attorney. Not just any lawyer, but one with a reputation for navigating the toughest, messiest divorces with precision and grit. I found her through a colleague's recommendation, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Claire, whose calm demeanor masked a fierce intellect. In our first meeting, she listened as I poured out my story, her pen scratching notes across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she looked up at me with a steady gaze and said, "We can win this, but you need to be smart. Document everything. Leave no stone unturned." Her words were a lifeline, and I clung to them. From that moment, I became methodical, almost obsessive in my approach. My initial anger morphed into a cold, calculated determination. I started gathering evidence of Julia's behavior. Every cruel word, every instance of neglect toward our 2 children, every sign of the affair I'd suspected for months but hadn't wanted to believe. I installed small security cameras around the house, discreetly tucked into corners she'd never notice, capturing late-night phone calls and hushed conversations. I added a GPS tracker to her car, tracking her unexplained trips to a part of town she had no reason to visit. Each piece of evidence, grainy footage of her slipping out at odd hours, time-stamped from the tracker aligning with her lies, felt like a brick in a wall I was building to protect myself and my kids. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about survival. While I collected this arsenal of proof, I also took steps to safeguard my finances. I met with a financial advisor in secret, moving money into separate accounts and securing assets Julia couldn't touch. I consulted Claire about the custody battle I knew was coming, learning every legal nuance that could tip the scales in my favor. At home, I kept up a facade of normalcy, greeting Julia with a tight smile each morning, asking about her day, even as my stomach churned with the knowledge of what I was preparing. I couldn't afford to tip her off, couldn't let her see the storm brewing behind my calm exterior. To the outside world, I was still the steady, dependable husband and father. Inside, I was a man at war. The day I served her with the divorce papers was one I'll never forget. I'd planned it carefully, waiting until she returned from one of her mysterious outings. The process server handed her the envelope as she stepped through the door, her arms full of shopping bags from a store she claimed she hadn't visited in months. Her face went pale, her mouth dropping open as she tore into papers, realization dawning in her eyes. "You can't do this," she stammered, her voice trembling with a mix of panic and disbelief. I stood there, silent, watching her unravel, and felt a strange surge of empowerment. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I wasn't the victim anymore. The fallout came faster than I'd expected. Within days, the affair I documented was laid bare, not just to me, but to everyone. Her lover, a married man named Greg, had been careless, and the evidence I'd gathered left no room for doubt. When his wife found out, she didn't hesitate. She filed for divorce the same week, her fury tearing through their lives like a wildfire. Julia's world began to crack apart. Friends who once fawned over her turned their backs, whispering about her in hushed tones. Watching her stumble through the wreckage of her own making was bittersweet. Part of me ached for the woman I'd once loved, the mother of my children, but another part, the part that had endured her betrayal, felt a quiet, undeniable sense of justice. By the time we reached the courtroom, I was ready. Claire had helped me build an airtight case. Every piece of evidence meticulously organized. Videos, GPS logs, text messages I'd uncovered from an old phone she thought I'd never find. In the hearing, Julia tried to paint herself as the wrong party. Her voice quivered with rehearsed emotion, but the judge saw through it. The footage of her neglecting our kids, leaving them alone for hours while she met Greg, ignoring their calls when they needed her, spoke louder than her tears. When Claire presented the evidence of the affair, Julia's composure shattered entirely. The judge's ruling was clear. I was awarded primary custody of our son and daughter, a victory that felt like a physical release, as if I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. After the hearing, Julia's life continued to spiral. She lost her job, a cushy marking position she bragged about endlessly. When her boss learned about the affair and the chaos it had unleashed, her social circle, once a glittering web of admiration, shrank to nothing, her name now a cautionary tale traded over coffee. I, on the other hand, found myself stepping into a new kind of freedom. The house felt lighter without her presence, and I threw myself into rebuilding a stable life for my kids. I took them to therapy to process what they'd been through, sat with them through late-night talks about their fears, and slowly, we began to heal together.